We tried to figure out, why isn't there more options for children and for families that have children with shortened life expectancies? Why are there only 3 hospice homes in the United States when there's 40 or 50 in Canada, when there's 112 in the UK, when there's a couple in Australia? I mean, what's the problem?
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, a public relations firm passionate about the power of sharing stories. Specializing in earned and social media, Media Minefield helps clients take control of their unique story and message. The show is hosted by Christy Peel, founder and CEO of Media Minefield, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
Sometimes when we talk about loss or grief, especially when it comes to babies, it's easier to tune out or focus on something else. It's hard. I encourage you to stay with me today and listen to a mother share her Flip Your Script story, because it reveals a problem in America that I honestly had never even thought about before. Melissa Johnston is a driven person. She's ambitious, accomplished, a senior vice president at a bank, a passionate youth sports volunteer. She's received many awards. Her story is inspiring because she's willing to talk about a devastating loss for the purpose of helping and educating others. And Melissa's a friend. Melissa, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Christy. I'm thrilled to be on this podcast. You know, I've loved listening, and it's just such an honor to be included. Thank you.
And do you know what's kind of crazy about this is that I know this part of your story, pieces of it. We were in a group together, so I know you. And I never thought to come and ask, because for me, it's hard to say, hey, I know this is a really difficult thing. Do you want to talk about it on the podcast? And so I want to applaud your bravery for reaching out and saying, you know what, I actually would talk about this. So thank you, because I think without people talking about hard things, other people dealing with hard things think they're alone.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, it's one of those things where losing my baby Audrey really helped me find my voice. I wasn't much of a public speaker prior to that. In fact, I dreaded getting up and speaking. And I realized that there was compassion and assistance that I could offer by sharing my voice. And so I've learned to lean into it and embrace it. I still get nervous, but I try to do it because I know it helps others.
And that's the spirit of the podcast. And one of the reasons I know that you are touched by the different guests we've had on. So let's start with when I first met you and you introduced yourself. I was struck by how you introduced yourself, because you say, I'm a mother of 4, 3 are living, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you talk about Audrey and are not shy from the loss that you had. And that has to be hard every time you say it. I'm a mother of 4, 3 are living. So let's talk about Audrey and when you knew that she wasn't going to survive to see her first birthday.
Yeah. You know, it happened 13 years ago, and it's amazing how things like that just stay in your mind, and the vividness of the whole experience just comes back to me in an instant. So yeah, when I talk about our family, we talk about having 4 children, 3 that run and 1 that flies. And the 3 that run still run, twin boys that are 12, and then our daughter is 7, and lots of energy. And it's very sweet when they draw a picture of their family. Even just yesterday, my daughter drew a picture of our family and put Audrey, up as a star up above. And so we really try to honor her as part of our family, even though she's moved on. So yeah, in 2007, Audrey was born, and she was only 4 weeks early, but she was tiny, just small, under 4 pounds. And so we knew something wasn't quite right, because at 36 weeks, she should have been more like 6 pounds. But the doctors couldn't really figure it out. I mean, she was breathing, she was taking milk through a feeding tube, she looked fine. And so it took 2 days. It took 2 full days of tests. Her brain scan came back normal. Her heart scan wasn't quite normal, but not extremely abnormal. She had a PSD, so a ventricle defect. But then they did the chromosome test. And that is when we got the news. So the doctor and a couple nurses pulled us into a room right away when we got there, because we would get to the hospital early in the morning and to see her because she's in the NICU. And they pulled us into a room, and first of all, they were amazing. However, unfortunately, doctors don't always have the best words to phrase difficult things. And I'll never forget what the doctor said. He said, "I'm sorry to tell you, Bo and Melissa, but your daughter has a condition that's incompatible with life."
What? Incompatible with life?
Yes, incompatible with life. Yeah.
Oh, that's
and
horrible.
So then we're sitting there like, then he's sitting there and he doesn't say anything right afterwards. We're like, that's exactly what we said. Incompatible with life. What's wrong? What does she have? And then he went on to describe it.
But even what does it mean? I mean, incompatible with life.
Incompatible with life.
Most people can deal with what they have to deal with. But when they don't have facts, then you go to all sorts of places like my brain just did of like, what? Incompatible with life? What does that even mean? Mm-hmm. Oh, and I'm sure the doctor was trying to be compassionate and trying to ease it up. But you can't ease that onto anyone.
No. That's why I tried to preface it by saying they really were amazing caregivers. The nurses, the doctors, Dr. Camp, Dr. Kauser. I mean, they were so good. It's just the words were just stinging, 27-year-old first-time parents, first child, healthy couple. To hear that was like, what's wrong? What's happened to her? So she was diagnosed with trisomy 18, an extra 18th chromosome. And there's different variations of that. You can be a full trisomy, partial, mosaic, and she was full. So that meant she had an extra 18th chromosome in every cell of her body. So it's also referred to as Edwards syndrome, and it's extremely rare. I mean, even in the NICU, there was maybe 2 out of 24 nurses that had seen a trisomy 18 baby, because over half of them don't survive past the 2nd or 3rd trimester. So we didn't have any tests done. Mm-hmm.
So I have a couple questions that I suspect people are wondering. So first of all, had you had any trouble with the pregnancy prior to her delivery? And if you had had higher level testing that they offer as an option, would you have known that she was going to have this situation in her chromosomes before she was born?
Yes, everyone asked those questions, and we did not do any tests. So any of the optional tests that I had during the pregnancy, I didn't do. And I think back on it, and I don't know what compelled me to not test, because I am a person that likes to know. I mean, I like to plan. I like to be prepared. I think my husband, so Bo is my husband, I feel like he didn't want to know the sex. So I thought that would be kind of cool. But then as far as the genetic defects, I don't really know why we didn't do tests, but we didn't. And so if we would have, it would have come up. So we did have troubles getting pregnant. So it took about 1.5 years of fertility medicine and treatment. And, but then once I got pregnant, we had no issues. I mean, she looked fine in the womb. I was measuring small the whole pregnancy, but that didn't really concern the doctor. I'm a little bit more slender in general, so that didn't really concern them. Of course, later on, they said that, that could have been a sign of just how I didn't get that big with my pregnancy because she was so small. So yeah, no real issues during the pregnancy, and then no preterm labor signs either. All of a sudden, the night, just 36 weeks in, was ready to go. I went into labor. Mm-hmm.
So if you could go back, would you have liked to have known, or were you glad you didn't know until 2 days after she was born?
And that is such a challenging question for me, because I know my personality. I'm a realist. I'm extremely practical. I tend not to make emotional decisions. I'm compassionate, but I lean towards logic. And I feel like if I would have known that Audrey had trisomy 18 when she was in the womb, and they would have told me, you're likely to lose her. There's only a 10% survival rate past the first week. She's likely to be born with all these defects. I, knowing myself, likely would have terminated the pregnancy. And that scares me. I mean, that gives me chills, because I didn't know, and I didn't do that. And she lived, we haven't even got into her story about her life, but she lived for 43 days. And it was an amazing story, an amazing time. And what she did on her time here was just incredible. And so it pains me to think about what could have happened had I known. And this isn't meant to alter anyone's decisions, but it is sort of interesting to think about how ignorance can be bliss sometimes.
Right, because they sometimes say with these higher level tests, if you're willing to do something about it, then get the test. If you're not willing to do anything about it, it's better not knowing. And so the gift may have been that you chose not to do the test because you did get to hold her and you do have 43 days of memories. So we went backwards to get back to incompatible with life. So we're sitting at this moment when you just find out that your beautiful baby, who's tiny but otherwise healthy, Audrey, has, do you think otherwise healthy? I mean, she looks like she's fine, right? And she's acting like a baby would act. And then you find this news out. What happens then?
Yeah. So my husband and I needed some time in that room. So the private room they brought us to, the doctor left first, and then we chatted with two of the nurses for a brief time, maybe half an hour, 20 minutes to half an hour. And then we sat in that room and we just held each other and cried. And we were like, what happened? What's going on? Like, this isn't our life. This isn't, like, whose shoes am I wearing right now? This isn't how it's supposed to be. And I'll never forget this because we just looked at each other and we said, all we can do is love her. I mean, that was it right there. It was like, the diagnosis is this, the statistics of her survival rates are this. That doesn't matter. We're her parents and we're going to love her and we're going to be here for her. And that was incredible. And so, yeah, just trying to live in the moment with her and take it all in. I mean, you have something wrong with your knee and you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you you need surgery or you need this or you need that. For Audrey, her condition was so complicated. I mean, the updates in the morning with the NICU staff were so long. It was like a 2-hour update with, here's what we're seeing today. Here's what your options are. Here's what we're thinking. Here's again what your options are. I mean, it was just such a heavy time.
When they first gave you that information and you knew that she wasn't going to survive long, did you expect more than a month with her, or were you thinking it would happen faster?
We thought it would happen faster. And so there was a couple really kind of turning points during her life journey. And one of them was, so I was at the hospital all day, every day. I mean, I was just there and we had a dog and we had neighbors and friends that helped take care of our dog. And my husband spent most of the time at the hospital as well. And he also spent many nights there. But one day, probably 3 days after the diagnosis, so 5 days into her life, I was at her bassinet crying and the social worker came in and she was like, look, Melissa, like, I see what's going on here. You're grieving. This is hard. But here's the thing, like, your daughter's still alive. Your daughter still needs you and she loves you and she wants you to be present with her. Like, you're grieving the future right now. And it was a little bit abrupt, but it was so powerful because she was totally right. I mean, for me to, I had already had a couple days with the news. So it was one of those things where it was like, you don't want to look back on this time and regret the fact that all you did was cry. You still have her. She's still alive. So take her out of the bassinet, do some kangaroo care, like, be a mom. And it was so powerful and so helpful. And I know then Dr. Krauser, after the first week, he was kind of saying his goodbyes to us because he didn't think that when he got back for his shift, they worked for a week, the NICU doctors, and they had 4 days off and then they came back. So he didn't think when he came back after his 4 days, he would see us. Like, he just thought, that would be it. Well, sure enough, 11 days later, she's still doing well. She's she's still alive, and we're still giving her baths and feeding her. So her journey, after they said she had a 90% chance of passing away during her first week of life, she lived for 43 days. And after 33 days, we got to take her home. So she got to live with us. She got to come home on hospice for 10 days. And that was amazing. I mean, to have her here in our home and take her on walks and introduce her to the dog and put her in the crib that we bought, and to just spend time with her here and have friends and family visit her. I mean, the gifts, we just felt so blessed that we were able to have more time than we initially thought. And we just tried to, after that talk with the social worker, I just really tried to live in the moment. I mean, we all do, but even more, because there's so much anxiety and stress you can put on yourself of, is it going to be today? Is it going to be tonight? Is it going to be this morning? You know, when are we going to lose her? Instead of just, I mean, like my dad always said, nobody's promised tomorrow. Like, nobody has a sticker on their head walking around saying how long they're going to live. Audrey's no different than any other baby. So just take care of her and love her. And so that's what we really tried to do. And that's what made her life even more special, because we knew tomorrow wasn't promised. And it was like, let's just enjoy today and try to introduce her to as many people as we can. Luckily, there wasn't COVID. So she had tons of visitors. I mean, family flew in from everywhere, friends. She was surrounded by love, which was so meaningful to us. Mm-hmm.
I mentioned in the introduction that there was a problem in America that I didn't realize, that I want to get to in a second, but I want to first go, I think, to the next most logical question, which is, how then, after she passed away, were you able to have the courage to say, you know what, let's have more kids?
Right. Yeah. That was really difficult too, because I mean, you and I both share a belief in God and faith and have a strong relationship with God. And it's one of those things where when anything, but something like that happens in your life, I really rumbled with that. Really, like, is God trying to tell me that I'm not meant to have kids? I mean, first of all, I couldn't get pregnant. Second of all, I had a child that didn't live long, had a life-limiting condition. So maybe I'm not meant to have kids. And maybe if I am, I'm supposed to adopt a child or be a foster mom, because I love kids. I mean, I coach sports, and our house is the house where the neighbor kids like to come and hang out. So I felt like I needed to have kids in my life, but really trying to figure out at what level. And so I prayed about it and talked to my gynecologist and doctor as well of, you know, could there be any connection between fertility medicine and chromosome disorders? And it was like, absolutely not. There's no connection. It's a 1 in 5,000 live births will have some sort of trisomy 18 situation. And you were the one, you know, it was totally non-related to the fact that you were taking fertility medicine. And so lots of prayers, decided to try again. And, Christy, we got pregnant again, but this time I had triplets. And then, because sometimes that's how it works with fertility meds, you can't control that situation. And so then I lost one of the triplets at about 14 weeks. And it was just so hard. And then I went into bed rest at 27 weeks and was on bed rest for 5 weeks in the hospital. And my twin boys were born at 33 weeks. So they were in the NICU as well. They were 4 pounds, and it was like doing it all over again. Here we go. But part of that was also weird is the fact that when they were in the NICU updates with the staff were only like 15 to 20 minutes. And I'm like, is there another team that we talk to? Like, is that it? That's all? Like, shouldn't there be more decisions to make and things to talk about? And then they kept saying, nope, they're growing, they're getting better, they're healthy. So yes, we did decide to have more kids, and it still wasn't easy. Praise God, the twins are now 12 and in the 90 plus percentile in everything that you could measure them on, but definitely some scary times early on in their life as well.
What you said about faith, I think, is so interesting, because I think there's a mindset maybe that it's this kind of blind walking forward. Everything is fine. There's no problems. I'm good. And I love that you use the word rumble, because that's such a great way to describe, based on how you talked about it, what was happening in your life was a rumble. Like, why did this happen to me? And what if it happens again? And all the questions that I think are real. And it's important that we talk about, because it isn't just this beautiful, well, that was hard, let's see what God has for us next, smiles and dancing. I mean, that's not real. The rumble is the reality. And then the faith part is the going forward, believing you're supposed to and not knowing how it would end up.
Right.
So how did the experience with Audrey make you a different kind of mom to your twin babies?
Yeah, that was also interesting, because then when I brought them home, so they were in the NICU for about a month as well, but they came home and they were still only, I think, 6 pounds or so when we brought them home, and they weren't even at their due date. When they came home, it wasn't even their time to be born yet. So they were still preemies, and they were awake all the time. They were just, oh my gosh, Bo and I talk about how opposite they were, because we just had one baby that was always awake. Like, we'd be like, okay, your brother's sleeping. Now would be a great time for you to go to sleep too. And we barely slept for 6 months after we brought them home. But the interesting part is we never complained. I mean, they were healthy, they were thriving, and we had lost a child, and we wanted to be parents. We wanted to have children of our own. And so we just worked through it. We just did it. And people would ask me, what's it like to have twins, and how hard is it, and this and that. And I just said, it's awesome. It's amazing. And I think that perspective of, after you have gone through the grief of losing a child, and you can find that hope to have more children, it's such a joy to see that and to experience it. And my husband and I still talk about it. The fact that, how could it be possible to experience such deep grief? I mean, just immense grief. And then 12 years, 13 years later, to have 3 kids and be able to experience such joy. I mean, the laughter and the love and the fun that we have, and nothing replaces Audrey. I mean, it's not like we had kids to get over her. It's just, it's adding on to our family. She's still part of our family. The loss is still part of our family, but it's adding on to it and building on to our family, and being able to have joy with kids that we just didn't know we could ever be a family and have a family. And so it's been quite a time.
And you talked about the joy that you now have especially the ages your kids are. I mean, that's just like a crazy whirlwind of, and right now homeschool and all the things that are, happening in the world.
Yes.
So you have that joy, but you also have purpose. You also have purpose, and you talked about it earlier, that you speak out about what happened with Audrey and what would have helped you, what could have made that better for you. And that's the problem in America, that I didn't know we had such a disparity with hospice for children. And I never thought about it before, because I have never needed it before. And when I thought more about you and your story and doing the research and digging into this a little bit more, how hard that you didn't have that support. And so talk about why hospice for children and babies and families is so important, and why you think we don't have it in America like there are options for families in other countries.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And frankly, I never thought about it either. I never thought, I saw children with special needs before in my life. I mean, you see them, but I never thought about children with specific life-limiting conditions. Maybe a few with cancer that I knew of, maybe a few families that had lost children in a car accident. But believe it or not, 700 children in Minnesota die every year. I mean, there are children with shortened life expectancies with families that need support, that need respite. I mean, the amount of stress and anxiety that a family with a child with a life-limiting condition, the amount of stress and anxiety they get acclimated to is so unhealthy and so difficult that there's such an immense need. And so I'll talk about why there are thousands of hospice homes for adults and only 3 for children in a moment. But I think it's important to talk about when I first got introduced to Crescent Cove, and that was one of my clients actually that knew of my story. He told me about a place or a organization that was working to start a children's hospice home here in Minnesota. And so I remember going down and having lunch and listening to this speaker talk about his daughter. And she was 16 years old and dying of cancer, and there was no place for her to go. She had 6 younger siblings, and she was no longer able to be in the hospital, and she didn't want to die at home. And her name was Mariah, and I've gotten to know her dad, Zach, since then. And Zach talked about what a difficult time that was for her and their family. And so they ended up taking her to an adult hospice home, and she passed away there. And it's such a different environment. And I was so moved by him speaking about this organization trying to start a children's hospice home in Minnesota, that right after he got done speaking and the event was starting to wrap up, I looked for the executive director, I introduced myself, and I said, I would like to be part of whatever you have going on, the communications committee, the marketing committee, the speakers committee. I am so moved by what you're doing. Sign me up for whatever you need. And so through working with that organization, at the time was called Children's Lighthouse, and now they're called Crescent Cove. We did that. We tried to figure out what it is. Why isn't there more options for children and for families that have children with shortened life expectancies, and some of them on hospice? Why are there only 3 hospice homes in the United States when there's 40 or 50 in Canada, when there's 112 in the UK, when there's a couple in Australia? I mean, why? What's the problem? And part of it's the lack of a reimbursement model. And so there isn't really, there's a fundraising issue and a funding problem. And there's also the discomfort among care providers with the communication around the fact that a child is going to die. And relaying that to the parents, the palliative care, the end of life care, it's difficult. And so there isn't that community, that support. Children aren't supposed to die. And so some people would say it's getting better, that there is less of a stigma around it, that parents are able to ask for help, and that care providers are able to communicate and to work with parents for end of life care. And others would say that it's not. I mean, we just talked to a palliative care expert out in Portland, Oregon, and she said, no, it's not getting better. We still have so much work to do. And so it's extremely unfortunate, and also really a blessing that we in Minnesota now do have a hospice home, and a palliative care and place of respite for families with children that have a shortened life expectancy. It was a long time coming, and Crescent Cove opened here in Minnesota in 2017.
It's you're right. It's something people don't want to think about, and I worked in news for a long time, as you know, and I covered a lot of really horrible things that happened to children, where children were killed or murdered, horrible things. And I rarely would receive any letters or emails from, the public. However, whenever I would cover the story of an animal being killed, people would send in bones and toys. Please make sure get this to the family. And I think it's because people they just don't know what to do. They don't want to by admitting that this happens for some reason, then you think, gosh, this could happen to me. People just want to look away. Mm-hmm. So I'm not surprised, but that whole, children horror, tragedy, and pet abuse always struck me, because every time I would do one of those stories, I would tell, my coworkers to just wait, I'm going to get a box of stuff to send to, these people who lost their pet, or oftentimes they would get another pet. And the children's stories, I think people are I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I got to go look at rainbows and think of positive things. Mm-hmm. They shut down. And I'm sure it's happened too when you talk about your 3 children who run and 1 who flies. I'm sure some people don't even I don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah, it gets awkward real fast.
Yeah. So even your point about more hospice care and more conversations like this would make people comfortable with it, and may even have physicians have some training so that words could be better than incompatible with life. Because
exactly.
It's just, even those words might be better. So I want to make the distinction between, because you and I, oddly, have been to a Ronald McDonald House together. And a Ronald McDonald House, I think, is what comes to mind when I think about sick children. But there's a distinction that I think we have to make between children who are going through treatment to recover and children who are looking for comfort at end of life. And those are 2 separate
Correct.
things. So we, I think, in America do a pretty good job of raising money and thinking about helping kids get healthy, get better, but not everyone... There isn't an outcome like that for every child.
Correct. Yeah. And that's exactly right. And the Ronald McDonald House is distinctly different in the fact that families have a place to stay while their child is getting treatment. For Crescent Cove, they have places for the children to come in and receive care, and also have comfort for families. So the family can stay with the child in a room, or the child can stay there and the family can have time. I mean, a lot of these parents with children with life-limiting conditions are doing round-the-clock care with oxygen, with feeding tubes, with IVs. And so to just have a break is huge, and is different than the Ronald McDonald House in that some of the children at Crescent Cove, not all of them, but some of them are on hospice, where there really isn't anything heroic left to do to save them. It's just trying to provide that comfort, and it can be at home. I mean, we definitely would have preferred to have Audrey be with us at home, but the support that they offer in terms of spiritual and music therapy, connection with other families that have a child with shortened life expectancy. I mean, we didn't know anyone when we had Audrey and knew her condition. And then even when she passed away, we put her in the Washburn McGreevy funeral car. We walked back into the house, into our home. We hadn't told anyone yet besides our pastor that she died. And then Bo and I, we just looked at each other and we're like, what do people do? They just drove our dead baby away. What do we do? We go for a walk? Do we call people? Do we post it on Carrying Bridge? I don't know what to do. And so just that end of life, moving on, grieving, support, working through that piece, that's a huge part of what Crescent Cove does in terms of providing that love and support and just meeting people where they're at, because you may not want to prepare for your child's death before your child dies. You may not want to, or you may want to talk a little bit about it. And you may want to, once your child dies, you may want to talk with other parents or families or people at Crescent Cove to say, what sort of therapeutic resources do you have, grieving support, different groups. I mean, we found them. We found a number of different resources on our own to try to work through it. But that's what Crescent Cove does. It connects with those families to support them and help them work through it, because it's devastating. It's just unimaginable grief and trauma. And frankly, Bo and I also feel like we beat the odds because 80% of marriages end in divorce after a child dies. And so we worked hard to preserve that. And that wasn't easy either. I mean, going through the loss of a child and seeing your partner grieve differently or at different times than you is also extremely challenging. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And what, Crescent Cove does is so important and something that I think a lot of people would expect that we already would have something like that all over the place, because certainly we're American, we're better than everyone else, but there are things where, and we've learned in the last year in many areas where we've got a long way to go. So we'll make sure that we put a link to Crescent Cove on the Flip Your Script podcast website. I know you're passionate about what they do and what a calling those people have who work there, knowing that everyone is leaving in tears likely or is going through grief at some point. So what a blessing that there are people out there willing to do that really difficult and important work. And on this podcast, we have people who share all different kinds of stories, and your Flip Your Script to be an advocate talking about this happened because of some strange genetic abnormality that you had no control over, nothing that could have been done differently or changed. It just happened. And so I applaud you for not keeping Audrey a secret and not keeping her something that is in the past, that she's part of your family in the present, just in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So you mentioned earlier that you're a planner, and I know you're a planner, and I imagine you spent more time preparing for this probably than all the rest of us working to get this podcast out. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure that you say before we get to the final question?
I do want to just share just an example, and there's so many stories and touching moments on Crescent Cove's website. But for me personally, one of the memorable times volunteering at the home, we go there periodically, do some landscaping, make some blankets, clean, fix outlets, whatever we feel like. My aunt made a quilt that hangs on the wall in memory of Audrey. We've donated books. My husband built bookshelves. I mean, it feels sort of like an extension of our own home. And one of the events I organized through my workplace, we went and we decorated the home for a child's first birthday. So there was a little boy on hospice, and similar to Audrey, he outlived the odds and wasn't expected to make it to be a year old. And he did. And so we decorated the home with a superhero theme, and it was so meaningful. And then we were kind of sitting along the sides, maybe in some couches and along the wall when the parents walked out and saw the home, or walked in and saw the home prepared for their son. And they were just so excited. I mean, burst into tears. They were just so thrilled to be able to celebrate this special milestone in a way where, they could have had something at their own house. They could have done something, but to be in community with people that understand how difficult it is and yet how special it is. That's just a touching example that I wanted to share of how meaningful that place is.
We talked about it a few times in the podcast that sometimes people either say nothing at all or maybe say the wrong thing. For people who are listening who know someone going through the darkest kind of grief and loss that anyone can think of, what could people say to you that would have felt good to you?
Yeah, that's hard. And I think what I say, even after I've gone through something like this, what I typically say is, I don't know what to say, except for that I want you to know that I'm thinking of you, I'm caring for you. Depending on how close I am, I may offer something specific. Can I come over and mow your lawn? Can I shovel your driveway? Can I bring you a meal? Saying, let me know if I can help you isn't helpful, because nobody knows what to ask for. And typically, especially here in Minnesota, people won't ask for help. So picking something specific, a couple examples, can I grab your mail for you? I'm going to Target. Can I pick a few things up for you? That's easier for people to say yes to, and not working so hard to come up with something perfect to say. I think that stresses you out, and there isn't anything. I mean, and that's the problem. People want to make others feel better and they want to say, okay, a couple of the hard things would be to say, I understand what you're going through because, and I was like, yeah, no. Trying to make me feel better, no. But to just acknowledge the feeling, to say, this has got to be so hard for you. This, I can't imagine what you're going through. This is hard. I don't know what to say. That's better than, oh, I understand because I had this. They come from a good spot, but it's not helpful. And then, yeah, we had people say things like, well, you can have more kids, right?
No.
I was like, oh boy. Yeah, not helpful. So again, just trying to make people feel better when they're grieving isn't really helpful. It's more of just acknowledging that it's hard, acknowledging that this is a tough thing to go through, and you're thinking of them, you're here for them. That's what was really helpful to us. Mm-hmm.
It's the sentiment that I see you and I'm here for you, which is different from I want to make it better, because there are things you can't make better.
Right. Totally.
This was a great conversation. Thank you for sharing about Audrey and about the need for different kinds of conversations when people are grieving and getting terrible news, and just for letting us know about Crescent Cove. I think it's an important thing to educate ourselves about, and to know that there are hundreds of families who have this kind of devastation every year. So we'll end with the last question, which is, was there a quote or something that motivated you to get through the difficult days?
Definitely the serenity prayer. I repeated that to myself over and over again. I already mentioned what my dad told me, and that was super helpful, that Audrey is no different than anyone else and that tomorrow isn't promised for anyone. So that was really helpful. And then the serenity prayer, where God grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I had to constantly remind myself that, because I do like to plan things. I like to be in control of things. I like to change things. And I just couldn't. I just had to accept that Audrey's life was going to be different than what I planned, and that was going to be okay.
And to love her through it.
To love her through it. Exactly. Wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Melissa. In listening to Melissa's story and knowing how difficult it is just to think about holding a little baby and knowing that your time is so limited, it's hard. As a mother, it's hard to hear it. And I'm so grateful that Melissa shared so openly and honestly and vulnerably about what that was like. But even if that isn't something that you know anyone who's ever gone through something like that, and you never have to deal with that kind of personal devastation, the wisdom in living your life in the moment, loving those around you, and not worrying about the future. Boy, it's so easy to get all worked up about the future, or really looking back at the past and missing the moment, missing what's happening right now. And that's something that we can all take away. My hope is that Melissa's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Christy Peel and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share our episodes with your family and friends. Do you or someone you know have a story about flipping your script? We'd love to share it. Contact us on our website, flipyourscriptpodcast.com. To stay up to date on all things Flip Your Script, make sure to follow host Christy Peel on social media. You can also check out the website for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and other great episodes.